Hey everybody, welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. We're back after a week off, and we are destined to disappoint you again. I'm Sebastian Peak.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
I'm Brett Van Sprunberg.
Let's move to Laramie, Wyoming. Josh, do you have any food updates for us?
Well, if you had to have to go to last week, because I didn't do one this week. Well, actually, I had the exact same thing this week. Boy, you're a ways off.
Look, I'm
that's
scrolling
so
your timeline, Josh.
Those aren't mine.
Double trouble, okay?
Mm-hmm.
More scrolling. Josh,
good-looking buns.
Just so you know.
Those are some good-looking buns.
His voodoo shirt. Josh got a voodoo shirt.
I'm gonna have
Nice.
to. I'll have that sitting next to me.
Okay.
Good.
Yep.
Some.
That was home bake.
Dude, I
cabbage?
actually made some. I'd made some smoked cabbage steaks.
Nice.
Is that what that is?
Along with
That's probably
two New
tasty.
York strips that are smoked and reverse seared. They came out fantastic and amazingly tender.
Look at that.
So I rendered down the fat caps of the New York strips, and it turned out to be buttery, wonderful goodness. I'm gonna die in like 3 weeks.
Okay, still scrolling. Is this it? No, he said not to use
Almost.
that one. All right,
Yeah.
Is this it?
There you go.
Okay. All right,
This is
Josh,
it.
can you tell us about your burger?
I can. I'm glad that we finally got here. This was a really good one. These are 3 fried chicken strips tossed in Cajun seasoning, which is then topped with shredded lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, and Thousand Island dressing. Oh, and white queso. Yeah, there's queso in there as well. So this was fantastic, and I had it again today, except that I added some Angry Buffalo sauce to it, and it just added that extra kick and zest that I found missing from the first time. But the phone's ringing. So anyway, the chicken was fried perfectly. The Cajun season was stamped on there nicely. The queso and everything all came together really, really nicely. If you were to get this, I would recommend that. You would add a little heat to it, but, not everybody would want to do that. The Cajun spices may just be good enough for most of you. So, this was a good one. I gave it a good 8.5. Not the favorite, but still really tasty and good enough that I got it twice in a row.
Top story, of course, this week has to be the Core i9-13900K launch. Or really, that would have been last week. We did podcast last week. Let's just pretend this is last week and you're just catching up on old episodes, even though we're recording it right now. And we're going to go to very topical 13900K processor review coverage. As the title indicates, Intel back on top, but are they back on top in everything? And of course, the 13900K launched recently. I have not seen it in stock anywhere near this $589 price, but that's of course like a 1,000-unit tray price. I think it started at like $660. But if you consider that it's going up against the Ryzen 9 7950X at $699, suddenly Intel has the budget option. And in fact, you can buy 690 and 790 boards with DDR4 support and save even more money. We're going to look at the 13600K soon, the i5, but for now we have testing of the 13900K on an MSI Mag Z690 Tomahawk Wi-Fi DDR5 board using the latest BIOS as of September 14. The only reason I even bring that up is because when I was writing this up, October 17, there was a new BIOS with new microcode, and I didn't test with it. So who knows if that changes anything. In the past, we've seen some changes related to power limits and things after the fact with these unlocked processor parts from Intel. But anyway, Cinebench R20 results, as we can see here from this full slate of processors, new and old, and the reason I have R20 is because I have legacy results from a 5950X that I borrowed, as well as the 5800X3D that we borrowed. And as you can see, its only competition is the 7950X, and it actually beats it. It beats it single core and all core. Can you believe it?
Inconceivable.
Intel, the company that said that Cinebench R20 doesn't represent real-world performance, and I have a link to their 2019 IFA presentation PDF where they say this. Well, how do they feel now that they're winning? And they're winning R23 against the competition. Here we have it against the 7950X. All-core, over 40,000 in Cinebench R23. And you can be a denier. You can say, oh, my i9-12900KS is good enough. And look at the results. It's just not. It's not good enough anymore, Kent. And I'm talking to you specifically right now. Blender, classroom render. Here, the Ryzen is back on top, but only by 3 seconds. So 2.5 seconds. It's really, really close. I think the easiest takeaway from this is that depending on the workload, the Ryzen 9 is going to trade blows with the Core i9-13900K. And you can see there's a little bit of an edge in things like 7-zip, as usual. And that tends to scale with core count, as does this older X264 HD benchmark. And here, the more demanding second pass, you get about 5 extra frames per second with the 7950X versus the 13900K. But how impressive is it that with fewer performance cores, we're still only on 8 performance cores with this, and just yet another massaging of the Intel 7 process, that we are actually trading blows with a 5 nanometer part from AMD.
Intel's got some good, they've got some good chip engineers. I mean, their process guys are still pretty good. And it sounds like they, they finally massaged their 10 nanometer, which is now Intel 7, to where it works well enough. They're able to get upwards of 6 gigahertz is pretty amazing, because isn't that called Denning scaling? Is Denard scaling? Yes, back from that kind of hit the wall in 2006, 2007, and we've been, well, not we, but the royal we, we've been able to get that up quite a bit higher without totally blowing the power budget.
I mean, it's hefty.
Mostly.
But it's not blown.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting that... Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to point out that Intel's 7, the Intel 7 process, with Raptor Lake, it's actually new. It's Intel 7 Ultra. I'm reading WikiChip here. Mm-hmm. Internally, they call it Intel 7 Ultra.
Yeah, it's still based on 10, but
it's a full PDK update over the one used by Alder Lake.
Yeah.
It can handle even more than a power. Plus. But the curve has been improved. This is where we saw some of the clock speed increases with Raptor Lake, is that it has a 200 megahertz at ISO voltage increase in clock frequencies.
Well, tell us about the power consumption and what it takes to cool it versus 7950.
Well, let's look at, here's Blender. We'll get to the gaming stuff in a second, but here's that Blender classroom render, but looking at voltage based on hardware info 64 logging. And the 12900K pretty much stopped right at 1.25 volts under load. And this one, as you can see, when I started the test, because you actually have to look at the inside of these two peaks to see the run. The run took so much less time using the new processor that I just cut off the chart. It's truncated. But here I'm actually, opening and starting Blender, and then it gets down to its all-core frequencies and voltage, which ended up being over 1.3 volts. And then it peaks way up at, 1.375 almost volts when it's doing
that nervous
boosts.
Yeah.
That nervous range.
Yeah, it's a little worrying, but it does that to hit those crazy 5.8 gigahertz turbo boost max frequencies. And here's some screenshots taken during single and all-core loads. I had Cinebench all-core running, and it was at
1.364.
That was single core. So here is the single-threaded Cinebench R23 load, and it hit a max of 1.364 volts. And then on all-core, it was 1.296. So basically, you can see that here. It's right around 1.3. I don't know why it scales a little bit higher. Hardware Info 64 and CPU-Z do not agree on voltage. I don't know if there's an offset in place, but it's been that way with this and the new Ryzen stuff, where CPUs will have a lower number. But you can see that there were 2 cores on this 13900K that were boosting up almost all the way to 5.8 gigahertz, and the rest were right at 5.5. It's, I think, equally impressive to look at the E-core stuff, because E-cores, 4.3 gigahertz on your E-cores, they're definitely producing a lot more in the way of performance than they were before, which is why you can compete with the likes of a 16-core, 32-thread processor with only 8 performance cores. But if we look at gaming, just look at 3D Mark, and we have TimeSpy, TimeSpy Extreme, and the new Speedway, which is very demanding and extremely GPU limited. And you can see between just the 7950X and the new 13900K that there's virtually no difference. There is much more of an advantage when you go down to TimeSpy, which is less demanding, a little bit more CPU bound these days, especially with a 4090, which is what I used to test this. And you go from 35,796 to 36,776. So almost 1,000 points higher with the Intel part. And I think that's just due to the extremely high boost clocks that you can get. And then I tried a Metro Exodus like 7. You know, of course, what you do with a high-end part with a 4090 is you test 720p low.
Mm-hmm. And
here's the difference. 262.72 frames per second with the Ryzen part versus 262.44 frames per second with the Intel part. Again, average of 3 runs. The only advantage really is that you got 2 frames per second higher on average in your 1% lows. And then you move up to 1080 normal, and it's slightly faster on the Intel side, but it's, again, these are very evenly matched parts. It's almost like Intel knew what AMD's performance was and then matched it. And they matched it with power. And we've talked about power. We've talked about voltage. The actual power draw from these things is pretty intense. I mean, you've got something.
Well, it's a lot of voltage.
Yeah, something over
to start with
300 watts. It's 253 watts is what they're saying it is. But then if you have a standard, unlimited motherboard BIOS situation like I did, it's drawing more than that. 325 watts is what I saw in Blender. So last night I published this little follow-up, this power scaling performance thing. And I'm not unique in this at all. Obviously, Gerbauer had his day one 90 watt, performance scaling, and he'll take a 10% performance hit to lower power by 30%. But I thought, hey, the last time they actually had a TDP, which Intel defines as being the maximum power that one should be designing the system for, ensuring operation to publish specs under the maximum theoretical workload. Well, they don't use TDP anymore for that reason, because they can't promise that when, say, the 11900K had 125 watt TDP and then was drawing 210 watts when I first reviewed it, and then 270 watts after their performance-enhancing BIOS update that happened shortly after I finished reviewing the product. So clearly, when your motherboard is ignoring power limits, those things just drew a tremendous amount of power. And the new standard is to have processor base power and maximum turbo power, which will also be ignored when your motherboard default looks like this. Here is the test motherboard. It's an MSI, and long duration power limit is set to 4,096 watts.
Oh,
I've got a 4 kilowatt processor here.
It's
how big are the traces on that motherboard? Just curious.
It's a robust board. I mean, it's a server grade PCB, they say.
I mean, how robust at 4,000
512 amps CPU current. That's how robust.
Oh, they're actually 4 gauge.
4 gauge.
It's a little ridiculous, of course, but that's the way it is. I mean, when you first boot this up,
those settings are meaningless. It's ridiculous.
Infinite. It's infinite power.
But why? You should say that differently. But why? Why even have it? What is the point?
The point is, like I just said, infinite power. You don't want any kind of actual artificial power limit. You want to be limited only by thermals. That's the new normal.
Okay. You're still not
So
saying
that's
it right.
why the processor...
Limited power.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's why the processor's glowing red in your thumbnail?
Hey, do you remember that Tau thing? TAU. And even here it shows 56 seconds, but that isn't real because these Alder Lake and the new Raptor Lake, they ignore Tau. It doesn't exist anymore. They don't use it. It used to be 56 seconds, and that made sense because back when you had a PL1, which was your base, and the PL2 was your boost, the Tau would limit how long PL2 was active. So after 56 seconds, boom, you're back down to PL1. Sorry. And that prevents your cooler from getting completely thermally saturated and becoming useless.
But now
it just boosts, and then when you add thermal velocity boost and opportunistic boosting within, if there's any kind of thermal headroom at all, it's like, oh, keep giving it power, more power. So it doesn't stop at 253 watts. This is a completely arbitrary number. Unless you manually go into your motherboard and enforce 253, it's not going to limit itself to 253. I said, hey, maybe it makes sense to put a power limit on your CPU. I'm not going to do the Drabauer 90 watt thing. He's done that. You can go look at those results. But I did 125 watts. That was their last official TDP on a Core i9. And then I did 241, which was last generation's supposed power limit on the 12900K. And I did some scaling testing. Now, without limits, same R23 score, 40,305, all core, 2281 single core. Now that actually rises to 2286 with a 241 watt limit imposed, which was consistent. It was odd, but it was consistent. And then when I lowered it to 125, it wasn't any slower. It was virtually the same. Obviously, the all-core performance is going to scale with power. It needs all of that unlimited power to reach the 40,000 Cinebench R23 score and beat AMD. But you don't see any meaningful difference at all in gaming. So here's 3D Mark scores. Time Spy Extreme, and Speedway at all three power limits. They're virtually identical. They're within the tolerance, basically, of the run variance. So especially Speedway, which is GPU bound, but Time Spy Extreme, they're a few points apart. Same with Time Spy. So,
but how multi-threaded is that load?
Clearly not very.
Yeah, agreed.
Because it's taking advantage of high single-threaded performance. And of course, 3D Mark splits their test up into like a GPU side and a CPU side, and these are just the GPU scores. But then we look at, here's Metro Exodus. Again, the 720 low results. And for some reason, it went up with a limit in place. 241, it goes up by almost exactly 5 frames per second on average. And the 1% lows were 3 FPS higher. I mean, it was
almost like it pumps enough juice in there that it just barely goes into a thermal mode.
Exactly.
Consistently.
Yes. Exactly.
Yep.
And that was my kind of dumb conclusion here, as I said. One thing that became apparent as I saw results that slightly favored running with a power limit versus without any limits, it is possible that our Core i9-13900K, when running without any limits and often peaking above 300 watts, was thermally limited. Shocking.
I didn't actually read your thing, so I didn't try to steal your thunder.
That's absolutely, you're absolutely right. The only conclusion you can draw from any kind of power limit scaling testing is that, holy crap, my unlimited 325 watt processor that's completely saturated at 360 AIO running at 100% fans and pump, I'm still hitting a thermal wall. If you stress all the cores at over 300 watts for a certain amount of time, your cooler is going to become less effective. And you would have to be under some kind of custom cooling or using a power limit to keep from throttling with all core loads that were that long. So what I found was if you just went down to 125 watts, set your PL1 and PL2 to 125 watts. If you just game, even if you go down to 125 watts, you won't see any change.
Hey, there's a lot of people who probably fall into that gamer or type category that merely just want the best in their system. They just want to buy the best. They want to have the best. They may not use all of the performance envelope, and you're just demonstrating you can just turn down the power limits and you won't even notice it.
I just think this opens up possibilities where you can use a practical cooler. You can't use a Noctua D15. I don't think. I don't actually have one. I have a D14, but I should get a D15 and just see how long it takes to thermally throttle. I can just find a review out there, but air cooling has been out the window since Alder Lake, really.
It's kind of gross just because, AMD had a pretty solid little cooler for their stock thing. Even had, the little LED lighting in there, and
the Wraith.
it did okay.
Yeah.
It did fine. Yeah. And now it's like, well, we're not going to ship one, and good luck. I mean, we say it's 125 watts or 173 or whatever, but
yeah, cool story, bro.
Yeah,
it's expensive to ship around a 2 kilo block of aluminium with your chip.
Pretty much. It's just, it's a little insane. I think, I'm hoping that this will start walking back, but I don't know when or what's going to cause it to happen, because this power consumption is just gotten a little crazy, and it's been, since the 22 nanometer, when the highest end Intel was a 67 watt TDP, and then it, every generation it jumped up a little bit, 77 to 87, 103, and then now 125 I think was the top before we got into this crazy power stuff with the 11 and 12 series, or even 10 series, I guess. It's sad because your cost of everything is going up dramatically because they have to overbuild the motherboards. So now you get cheap motherboards out the window. It just doesn't exist anymore for these new generation of parts. DDR5 is expensive. These chips are okay, but when you start talking about, well, I've got to have a better case, I've got to have a better cooler, I can't do a processor and a box with a cooler, just doesn't work that way. And you're just boned. You're spending more money than you have before. And I think a lot of people are taking a pretty good look at AM4 processors right now because boards are inexpensive. DDR4 is super inexpensive, and they've cut the prices on all of those chips.
If you wanted to stay with Intel and you've put down the money to buy the highest end board you could afford, you're buying a board nowadays. Clearly, Sebastian's just demonstrating this fact that they're ignoring PL1 limits. They're ignoring PL2 limits. They're ignoring Tau. I wouldn't say that we're getting close to the edge, Josh. We're over the edge with the high-end stuff. And good luck cooling it. Good luck.
That's really the only problem, is we can certainly buy boards that can deliver enough power. We haven't been seeing all these reports of, my system can't run the new 13th gen Core i9. It can. They're more than capable of delivering the power. There's just no way to cool it. So you will be throttling at some point if you're all core unlimited, period. Just as you are with Ryzen. It's actually kind of impressive if you think about it. I'll play devil's advocate for Intel here. How impressive is it that they're hitting a max of 325-ish watts when they're still on 10 nanometer? And AMD, the Ryzen 9 7950X on 5 nanometer is at 250 watts in the same load. So, I mean, that's obviously 75 watts less, but they're at 5 nanometer. You'd think it would be half, but it obviously doesn't scale that way. But
no, it's materials and the FinFET design, channel design, stuff like that they've really they've done a lot of work at Intel. And I mean, even though this is kind of an AMD specific flavor of 5 nanometer, I think the long and short of it is you've got so many billions of transistors, you've got 3 chips on the AMD thing, and they have such robust powered delivery systems, not only just in the motherboard itself, but gating and distribution and all that in these new chip designs, that they can pull that amount of power without the issues that we saw, 20 years ago when, some of the first 180 nanometer stuff was coming out, or probably 250. 220-ish. I'm trying to think which one had the most issues. I think 130 nanometer when it first was coming out, that they had the whole via migration issue or void migration.
Oh
which would
my
actually
god, I totally
detach,
forgotten about that.
vias inside a chip, that you'd have a chip that would be running fine and then suddenly it just wouldn't. And how they've gotten away from all of these things with just materials and how they do deposition and I mean, it just is absolutely amazing that you can apply that kind of power to a 5 nanometer chip and it just doesn't die.
Yeah.
In fact, they're now designing them up to run at 100 degrees Celsius, which before you just simply couldn't do that. I mean, the control technology, both in software and the hardware built into the chips and motherboards, it really is top notch what they can do. And they are running these chips at the very ragged edge.
All right, moving on. NVIDIA, of course, has been in the news for the last couple of days, at least. This is an article from The Verge. 2 Reddit users have posted evidence of RTX 4090 power connectors burning or melting weeks after warnings about thermal variance with the new 12VH power connector. How do you pronounce that? 12VH.
Whooper!
Very high power.
Yeah.
So NVIDIA
No, it's
12 volt high
12 volt high power.
12 volt high power.
Sorry.
12 volt high power. Josh,
Yeah.
I agree.
NVIDIA's Brian Del Rizzo said in a statement to The Verge, quote, "We are in contact with the first owner and will be reaching out to the other for additional information," end quote. And of course, there's this picture. And I'm sure NVIDIA is thrilled about having their logo featured right on pictures like this.
I don't think so.
But I suspect what will end up happening is that we'll find that there was a considerable amount of strain put on these connectors.
Don't molest your cables, kids.
You can
and repositioning.
Stress these cables. If you go through to find sources of sources, it ends up that there were some PCI SIG slides, alleged slides. They look real, and here's an example of one of the slides where it's literally the same thing that we're seeing now, where if you stress the cable enough, it causes, I don't know if it's arcing or what's happening. There's more to it.
Well, essentially what happens is
it's not
when
arcing.
you stress the cable, you are changing the surface area of contact in between those connectors.
Yeah.
And so the lower the surface area, the more power that's going through there, and the more it's going to heat up and act naughty.
So if you look at the PC Mag article, they have more pictures, and then they have more of these slides, and they actually give the source, which is, what is this, Billy? I think this is Chinese. Here, let's look at the actual full image. It's 3 slides, and they did these 55 amp continuous tests with a test power supply. They showed a prototype PSU and then the 30 millimeters that you're supposed to have as a minimum for the cable bend. Then there's that slide that we've seen. This is interesting. Under possible root causes, it's just as Josh was saying. It's changing the contact points within the receptacle surface.
That's the angle of the dangle, which is what I just wrote.
Oh, I see.
It's in direct proportion to the heat of the beat.
It's exactly correct, Josh.
According to PCI SIG, I'm quoting from this slide, resistance variation between pins leads to unbalanced current. As bending causes high resistance in other pins, more current transfers to lowest resistance. Reduction in contact area caused by side load condition and loss of contact in mating interface. Possible deformation of receptacle. So you don't want to put a side load on these things. I don't know who it was on Twitter earlier today. One of the system integrators had a PSA video out there on cable adapter clearance and what cases that they have work and what don't, and certain cases where you have to use a vertical install for the GPU. You can't use a horizontal install because there's just not enough space between the end of the video card and the beginning of the glass side panel, and it would cause too much stress on the cable. So it's just, there aren't enough really wide ATX mid towers out there for this to not become an issue at some point. Because
Right.
at some point, you're going to shove this thing in your case. You don't quite have enough clearance, but you're not going to go buy a new case. And what information is there out there? What case vendor so far has stepped forward and said, this is our 4090 compatible case?
Yeah, NZXT did a couple of pictures today of, hey, our H5, I think it is, a brand new H5 or whatever that was. That it fits, but they didn't show the cable routing.
No.
But the folks at Falcon Northwest did show their cable routing, and they've got a third-party supplier for that thing.
Right, they use Cable Mod.
And it looks okay.
Right, there's an arc to it. Like it is curved, but Talon, the mid-tower case from Falcon Northwest is called the Talon. I've reviewed a couple of those, and it's quite wide. It's a stout mid-tower, which gives them plenty of room to have a graceful curve to that power cable. And one of the things that Falcon Northwest pointed out to one of the commenters on their post showing the Cable Mod cable with the 4090 was, we've been, using this cable on 3090 Ti's that are putting out, they're drawing 450 watts since February and had 0 issues reported. So I think it's a combination of using a quality cable, not putting stress on it, the fact that their case is a little bit wider, and then other variables like the fact that I know Falcon Northwest uses a metal bracket to actually firmly attach the GPU in place so it's not moving at all. If it's not going to wiggle at all, and you have plenty of slack on the cable, I don't think there's ever going to be any strain on that, even in transit. So they have it figured out. Unfortunately, for the DIY set, you're going to be scrambling to find a case that's wide enough to have a graceful arc. I mean, if you can see behind me, this is a 4090 with the adapter and the cables that I've been using since before.
And that's a good 4-inch diameter arc.
It is. I have
how many 10 in
4 inches. This is like 5 inches.
That's like seriously
stop bragging.
It would be 13 inch wide case to get all of that in there.
Jeremy, this is 5 inches and it's not even hard. This is totally flaccid 5 right here.
Well, you don't want it to get hard.
You didn't have to feed into it. You just didn't.
Well, we're not done talking about NVIDIA. We talked about on this show how ridiculous it was, how it was problematic that they had an RTX 4080 16 gig, an RTX 4080 12 gig that offered completely different levels of performance, far beyond the 4 gigabyte disparity in VRAM, because it was a totally different chip. It was really the 4070. We all knew it. We talked about it ad nauseum. And then on October 14, NVIDIA unlaunched, which is apparently a more positive way of saying canceled, the RTX 4080 12 gigabyte. So we weren't going to have that. Now, the question that remains is, are we going to have a 4070 at $899? Or will it be $799? Or something else?
I don't know, but this is the launch that has really gotten me unexcited about graphics cards right now, because at least when like the 3080 was launched, it was about the same price as a 2080 Ti, or well, 2080 Ti was more expensive, but it was about the same price as a 2080. Of course, MSRP didn't really last long, but you got double the performance, and now you pay $400 above that for, in all actuality, maybe double. I don't know. It's not fun.
Yep. And it might catch on fire.
Maybe I wanted my cake and I wanted to eat it too, damn it. But performance costs money.
Yeah, but that's a hell of a jump.
The performance.
But no, I'm expecting. No.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to say that I expect that we're going to see a lot of them 4080 12 gigs in pre-builts. Just pull them off the shelves. Don't even put them in retail packaging. Just shove them in case builder stuff. It's like, oh, you want a 4080? Sorry, we don't even offer the 16 for you. You get a 12. Because, well, we got a bunch of them to unload in years.
I don't actually think they have a bunch of them. From all indications,
that could be true.
there were very few 4080-12s that had been built and delivered to partners. And I don't think NVIDIA really stocked a ton of them. I could be wrong, but...
That would be good for NVIDIA, because they could just bail on it very quickly.
Remember, it was packaging that we heard publicly from NVIDIA that they were reimbursing their partners because there was already a lot of 4080 12 gigabyte packages that had been produced. So if they're getting reimbursed for those, I'm guessing it's more that than the actual product. If there is product out there, it'll just get stickered over. How do you pronounce this again, guys? Vesa?
Vesa.
Vesa.
I'm going to go with Vesa.
It's everywhere you want to be. Vesa. So they released their DisplayPort 2.1 specification, which sounds a lot like just the stuff we already heard about, USB Type-C's capabilities, USB 4 capabilities. Jeez. And what's interesting about this is all previously certified DisplayPort 2.0 products, including ultra-high bitrate capable products, whether it be GPUs, docking station chips, monitor scaler chips, PHY repeater chips, on and on and on, have already been certified to the stricter DisplayPort 2.1 spec. This feels a little bit like what the USB standards body does, where they're just rebranding. If everything 2.0 is 2.1, then why do we have to have 2.1?
Because it's one better.
Okay.
Well, because it costs more. Wouldn't you like to pay for 2.1 versus 2.0?
But they talk about things that it's added. I mean, I guess what they're saying is that electrically 2.0 was capable, so if you get a firmware update, your connector is already 2.0.
Yeah, I think it's when when they actually do a certification number and have the list of stuff, you have to go up another notch. Even though the design itself isn't going to change, it's going to support more things through the spec. So you update the spec, and physically it remains the same.
Yeah, and supposedly it does better, like with USB 4 or the other USB that's 4 but not quite. It does better handling of traffic backwards and back and forth. So it should electrically manage
channel.
it better. Yeah. In theory.
The back channel, I know. Yeah, the communications from displays back to the source. Yep.
Speaking of standards, Intel has standards, and they lead the industry, according to this press release by Intel, with Next Generation Thunderbolt. Now, this is very, very closely tied to what we were just talking about. They have demonstrated early prototype for Next Generation Thunderbolt based on the newly released USB 4 V2 and DisplayPort 2.1 specifications. So you better believe that even though we have USB 4 and DP 2.1, we're now also going to have Next Gen Thunderbolt.
Oh, yes. Good.
Which is the same, but different.
Right. I'm looking at the numbers like, 80 gigabits per second, up to 120. Display, right.
Support for DisplayPort 2.1, of course.
Go on.
PCI Express. Compatible with previous versions of Thunderbolt.
Oh, of course.
I'm sorry, what?
Shocking, eh?
Naturally. Well, right. Thunderbolt over USB-C is Thunderbolt over USB-C, right?
Yes.
You're not going to be able to plug Thunderbolt, first generation. Oh, well, maybe you are. Has Thunderbolt always been over USB-C, or was it over that mini DisplayPort connector initially?
The Thunderbolt 1 was over mini DisplayPort.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's there's a video. You can read about this. It's exciting stuff. Possibly less exciting because USB 4 is already so fast, and DisplayPort 2.1.
Yeah.
And,
But Thunderbolt 4 can it has to support PCIe tunneling.
Oh,
whereas USB 4 2.0 doesn't, nor does... Yeah,
gotcha.
Whereas Thunderbolt 4 has to.
Okay, excellent.
And I think that was pretty much it.
Okay. By the way, since I published this article, Microsoft altered the verbiage on this page, so I'll just
pray
the updated one.
They don't alter it further. Yeah. Yes.
Windows 10 update, guys. I think we talked a couple weeks ago about, you want 22H2? It's called Windows 11. Wrong.
We did talk about this.
It's called Windows 10 22H2. It's coming. It's coming.
It's here.
We didn't believe in it at the time. We thought it was a myth. We were like, no. we won't do it.
Last Thursday?
Yeah, something. Let's see, the 18th.
Yeah, I think it was last Thursday when I started get it on my test machines.
So it's a.
And so far, it hasn't killed anything. So hey,
this is the part they changed. It says Windows 10
what did they change?
version 22H2 is a scoped release focused on quality improvements to the overall Windows experience in existing feature areas such as quality, productivity, and security.
Well, some of those are a lie.
And
well, I mean, what do you mean some?
what it said last week, and I think they have a little footnote that they changed. Yes.
Well, it does have one thing that is very much new.
The update was changed.
All right.
Publication.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
It's quick.
What do you mean?
It was actually a quick install. The entire reboot only took like an extra 15 seconds. Previous feature updates like to take between 2 to 5 minutes before they will finally do it, and occasionally toss in some extra reboots just to scare the hell out of you. But no, this was stupidly fast. This was about the same as like a normal patch, which also explains how little difference I've noticed between 20H2 and 22H2. 21H2. Yeah.
I just checked. I'm on 21H2 right now on this machine.
Yeah. So there you go.
Why upgrade? It's fine.
When I tweeted about this right after they made this announcement, this post, the quote was, Windows 10 version 22H2 will have a limited set of features focused on productivity and management. That's it. That was the entire paragraph. I thought, wow, okay, so this is really just, they're trying to steer people away from upgrading unless they're just in a business setting because they want you on Windows 11. And that paragraph has been changed to...
They want you on what?
Windows 11? What?
I ain't beta testing your crap at work.
They want you on it, Jeremy.
It ain't gonna happen.
You should be on it.
I don't think penetration's hit 10% yet in the corporate world. We have to hunt them down when someone friggin' when a Dell BIOS update re-enables BitLocker and all of a sudden Windows 11 can sneak in, we've got to go and steal the computer. Nope, sorry, you got a bad update. But it looks like my Apple at home.
That's so odd that you disable BitLocker, though, because in a
we use
environment.
We use a McAfee encryption at the moment. We are migrating to BitLocker, but...
Sorry. Yeah.
You have no idea. And the two of them do not play together at all.
Probably not.
Does Intel still own McAfee, or is that...
As far as I know, yeah.
Yeah.
But even they don't want it.
Let's pause here for a word from this week's podcast sponsor.
So, what gets in the way of your workplace productivity? For many professionals like you, it can be repetitive typing and other boring tasks that suck up far too much of your valuable time in the workplace. Think of how many hours you spend responding to the same questions over and over in email and chat, or even digging through your file sharing platform to track down the correct email template, and then carefully personalizing those replies to make sure your message is both targeted and authentic. Your new answer to eliminating repetition? TextExpander. TextExpander's powerful shortcuts and abbreviations streamline your work, so all you have to do is type a short abbreviation, and TextExpander does the rest of the work for you. Create text templates and insert them anywhere you type with just a few keystrokes. Here's how it works. Drop your commonly used content into TextExpander app and give it an abbreviation. Add customizations like today's date, fill in the blank fields, timestamps, and more to make content feel more personalized. Then all you have to do is type a few characters to expand your content and do a quick search to access it wherever you type. And that's just the beginning of how TextExpander will impact your team's productivity. The possibilities to improve your workplace productivity are endless with TextExpander. Show listeners can get 20% off their first year at TextExpander.com/PCPer. That's TextExpander.com/PCPer. Check it out now.
Moving on.
We're back. And we're going to talk about AGESA AGESA microcode updates from AMD. It's exciting. It's just a fact of life if you benchmark because it often affects performance. And here is an example. Now, this is not exactly new, even though this is a news story from today at Tech Power Up. AMD releases AM5 Aegisa 1.0.0.3, reintroduces C-state boost limiter with more than 4 cores loaded. Now, this does obviously affect performance, and apparently version 1.0.0.2 did not have this. The limiter prevents the CPU cores from boosting above 5.5 gigahertz when more than 4 cores are active. Anyway, I initially was on 1.0.0.1 with our test board. It's an MSI X670E Ace that AMD sent along with the CPUs for our review. And that board, and the only BIOS I had available to me from AMD in their shared folder was a 1.0.0.1. And the reviewer's guide recommended using that for all performance testing. MSI, shortly after I think the actual review embargo was up, released a new BIOS. And lucky for me, I didn't get my Ryzen 9 processors until release day. FedEx dropped them off on release day. So when I first fired those up, I was already on 1.0.0.3. Now, I'd done testing prior to this on a Ryzen 7 7700X, and I threw all those numbers out and retested on 1.0.0.3 because it changed performance. So any of those launch reviews that are out there that, you know, did everything right and had everything done on time and made the embargo, those are on outdated Aegisa microcode, and the performance characteristics of their chip are actually slightly different now than they were when they reviewed them. So you can't win. You either miss the embargo like I did, and I still haven't officially published a Ryzen 7000 review. Partly because of this, because I did days worth of work that I had to throw away. But it makes a noticeable difference, even if it's only 1 to 3%. There are performance differences, and when you're trying to benchmark for, you know, posterity, I want to have results that I can use for the next year, and then I'm going to have numbers that don't match up.
Let's talk about your
benchmarking
likability,
for accuracy, and not distance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Slow.
I was going to
wins
say,
the race.
let's juxtapose your credibility and your likability factors.
Well,
wherever
likability is
those
very
cross.
low, and credibility is basically nothing because
Let's talk
you
about
only have
where
my
those
word for it.
cross.
It's
Though
a flat line, Brett.
I did live stream the very first time I ever put the Ryzen 9 7900X into the motherboard. I let people go through the BIOS setup with me and, you know, run some initial
Is that the
benchmarks.
one where you were like sloshing beverages over the chip?
I was like
over
dangling things over the LGA panel.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Anyway, Aegisa microcode, it's exciting. It alters performance. It changes the amount of voltage that the CPU draws. It changes the boost characteristics. Hey, remember Memtest86? It's been updated. Well, thankfully, the interface hasn't been. 'Cause this is.
No, you can't update that.
No,
That's classic.
absolutely not. Not only
But
Memtest,
that shot does have RD RAM in it, by the way. So.
Oh no.
That's a Pentium.
yeah,
I was going to
found
point out the Pentium 4
It's not just a Pentium 4.
and an 8-bit board too. Nice.
Wait a minute. This is an i850 board. Is this socket 423? Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah.
That's a 1500 megahertz Pentium 4. Wow.
Yeah, I had to find a good screenshot.
You know what? I just realized something as I said that. What kind of an idiot am I? Of course it's a socket 423 because by the time they went to 478, they were on DDR. All right. Carry on. So AIDA64
Yes.
also updated, huh?
Yeah. But the big one, it's a big update with AIDA. I mean, it's not like a whole bunch of things have just been released that they need to try and figure out how to support.
Yeah.
A lot of 5s involved in this update. But they also went full out, like a bunch of the Corsair all-in-one liquid coolers, Steel Series Apex and Rival OLEDs. It's added it all to it, so you can just do your AIDA displays via that if you really feel like it. But no,
That
the big
is
fun is Memtest86 Plus 6.0. After more or less a decade and a bit We now have a brand new one that'll support 64-bit UEFI. It knows what DDR5 is. It'll recognize the newer AMD and Intel CPUs. It was the greatest thing to figure out, oh, it's that particular DIMM which is causing my machine to become a nightmare. It took, a day to run it to actually get the errors to come out, but yeah, it's really nice to see this come back, especially after all the horrific stuff in the 90s and early 2000s where Memtest86 sort of died and they tried to make it Memtest86 Plus, and then, well, he just sort of got bored with that because he wasn't making any money off it and it was a lot of work. But hey, we've got a brand new one.
I used to call that at the Memtest86 OS because you booted straight into it.
Oh yeah, still do.
Who doesn't want to party like a princess? I know I do. And I can party like a princess in 1836 in Victoria 3. Jeremy.
Yes.
This is a game.
Well, you're a princess because Victoria doesn't become queen until the next year. But this is the third one of this particular style of grand strategy game from Paradox. It's one of their more interesting ones because the 19th century wasn't really kind to a lot of people, and they've always just sort of gone with that. They don't make it good or bad. It's just like, yeah, throw the kids into the coal mine because who else is going to be working down there? You got, as with the previous ones, you've got several dozen countries you can play. If you don't want to do that, you can be the Ottoman Empire. You can be the Rus. You can do whatever you really want to do. And with Paradox, they don't completely rewrite the game or completely make it a sequel. What they do is take everything that people loved and keep that and get rid of the cruft that just they eventually got rid of via DLCs and patches anyways. But yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I mean, you can finally colonize the US and Canada if you so desire. And it looks significantly prettier than the previous one. So if you're into that sort of thing, it's a really good series. It's a mix between Crusader Kings and Europa Universalis. Not quite as complex as one, not quite as role-playing as the other.
This next one, the title had me excited because in our show notes, I think Brett listed this as Cyberpunk 2077 update. Like, yes, we're finally off 1.60. They've put in a hot fix so it doesn't keep FSR on even when you turn it off. But no.
Stop with your expectations. Stop.
It will give you cyberpsychosis, which is something you've already experienced from trying to benchmark it.
Okay. I'm gonna admit something right now on this live broadcast.
Okay. Oh, we're listening.
I don't know what edge running is. I have no idea. I know that's associated with Cyberpunk. This is an article about it. Edge runners inspired cyberpsychosis. What does that even mean?
Anime.
Wasn't it a tabletop game?
It was an anime based on the game.
But
Edge Runners
this is more recent.
It was
a TV show on Netflix.
Oh, it's a TV show.
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was like a way of playing the game or something. Like I don't understand.
No, they turned the game into like a 10-episode, 8-episode anime.
Okay,
something like that.
I mean, if you want to edge run while you're playing the game, throw in a 13900K and a 4090 with a bent cable on it, and you will definitely be running the edge.
Okay.
I'm just not sure my eyes are going to vibrate like that at the end, but maybe. The point was I think this modification gave breathed life from one of the aspects of the anime called cyberpsychosis. They brought that from the anime back into the game. I'm not sure how they're implementing it right now. I mean, Kent would know.
Well, there's a humanity stat, or at least there was in the pen and paper game, where, you had a humanity stat where if it went low enough, you would, and if you played the game, you just sort of go loopy and start slaughtering people because, well, why the hell not? You're a machine and you're not even real, so neither are they. And that was one of the things with the game is that you can just swap stuff out all that you like. In this case, it's like, you want that new Cyber Eye, but it might just put you over the edge, and now all of a sudden you're going to start blacking out and waking up with a lot of people very, very mad at you and a lot of other people very, very dead.
Real quick, let's talk about another review that went up recently, back on October 18, actually. Samsung 990 Pro. And you know what? This might be the fastest Gen 4 SSD. I haven't seen the new Solidime one yet, but this one's really fast. It's offered in a with heatsink, which actually has RGB now, and a without. And we got the without in for our testing, the 2 terabyte. And as you can see, looking at the 980 Pro 2 terabyte and the 990 Pro 2 terabyte, they look pretty much the same, but they don't perform the same at all. And previous generation Samsung drives, even though it was Gen 4, don't be confused. A 2 terabyte 980 Pro is not a high performance solution. It was disappointing. Their 980 Pros did not scale well with capacity. The 1 terabyte performed better than the 2. I received a 512 initially, and it way outperformed the 2 terabyte, as you'll see. Even the let's just look at some numbers. If you look at the PC Mark 10 drive benchmark, a very good test. We have both quick and full system results here. And the 990 Pro is just obliterating the competition. I tested it against that 2 terabyte 980 Pro and the Hynix Platinum P41 at 2 terabytes, which is an excellent drive. And it's like 1,500 points ahead in these tests. So it's pretty impressive. And I mean, look how slow the 980 Pro 2 terabyte is in like these mixed workload, real world type tests. Here's the breakdown, by the way. The full system drive benchmark, the average bandwidth is over 750 megabytes per second, which doesn't sound that high because it's not the glamorous sequential numbers, but this is a more realistic scenario, loading things, opening programs, that sort of thing. And the Hynix Platinum P41 is at 614 megabytes per second. So we're at like 140 megabytes per second on average faster than that Platinum P41. And I mean, the numbers with the 980 Pro 2 terabyte are it's not very good. 450 on average. And then the quick drive benchmark, same thing. It scales up considerably to the 990 Pro. And here we have some of those Crystal Disk Mark results. Sequentials are actually slightly faster with the Platinum P41, but we're talking 7156 versus 7136, if that matters. Though, I will say, at low Q depths, QD1 specifically, the Platinum P41 is significantly higher. Over 6,000 megabytes per second sequential at QD1 versus 4,700 with the 990 Pro. And it does, actually the 990 Pro does a lot better with sequential write performance than even the Platinum P41. So I could go over some of these numbers some more, which works, about as well as you'd expect, especially over audio. I will point out that the one area where the previous generation 980 Pro 2 terabyte was actually faster was in 4K random write. Now, I only test with one thread. I do QD1 through QD8. And at lower Q depths, the 990 Pro is faster than the 980 Pro, quite considerably so. But starting at QD4, the 980 Pro is faster. I feel like this is just like one firmware update away from being rectified, but Samsung clearly has tuned the firmware of this drive to lower Q depth performance, which is where those huge gains in a benchmark like PC Mark 10 system drive benchmark are so evident, because most of this is happening at those low Q depths. So anyway, it's a very impressive drive. I don't think the pricing is bad at all. If you look at what the 980 Pro launched at, and Josh has brought this up before, storage is one of these areas where it's great. You don't have the massive price increases for performance that you have in like graphics cards, because the 980 Pro launched early last year at $400 for 2 terabytes. This one is launching with significantly higher performance a year later at $289. What's not to like? It's significantly faster. It costs more than $100 less than the other one did at launch. Now, I did not have a WD Black SN850 in to test. So that's the next one I need to grab along with that new Solidime drive. But this is a very impressive drive and seems to be priced competitively. So,
yeah, the 980 Pro wasn't really a Pro, was it?
No, it wasn't.
No, it felt like, I don't even know if it was an Evo. The Evos used to be really fast drives. It just felt like the 980, and there was a 980, like just a plain 980.
Yeah, that's PCI 3.
So yeah, it's
Which, oddly enough, if I can reach it, I still haven't installed it in my wife's computer. So, yeah.
Are you sure
Within
that's not
arm's
PCI
reach.
Gen 4?
No, it's 3.
Oh, okay.
Read speed up to 3,500 megabytes.
Okay.
So, yeah. Just had a 5-year warranty.
Hey, you've already used up a year of that warranty, and it's just sitting there.
Pretty much.
All right, let us move on to picks of the week.
I mean, at least you haven't run through all the bits.
Me. You know, as we talked about it earlier, AM4 is still a viable platform, and there are more reasons to jump to it. If you've been holding off, I know people who have had the same CPUs for 8 years. It just happens. I mean, they're not bulldozers, but but there's a lot of, i7s out there and i5s that have been perfectly good gaming performers, and your thing's getting long in the tooth. And AMD has now slashed their prices across the entire 5000 series line. You can get a 5900X for about $340, I think. But the one is most interesting to me is, of course, the 5800X 3D. It is now, well, this says at $349, but I have seen it down to $120. No, I mean, $120 to $300. No, $329. So at Newegg, it still is at $329. Amazon, they just recently jumped the price up $20 to $349. So pick your poison. You can get still what is a top gaming processor. 8-core, 16-thread, 3DV cache. You can get fast DDR4. You can get 32 gigs of DDR4 3600 for under $100 now. That's
bonkers.
Dirt cheap. Yeah, and it's more than double for DDR5. So, and again, motherboard costs, you can get a good motherboard for $150, $160. Really good. And yeah, just get it. I'm really considering ordering one here soon at that price, but
so am I. Before it goes up, especially if Newegg still has it at $329. I mean,
yeah,
I may.
You can put it next to the SSD
tonight.
Yeah. No, this would probably go into my main computer, and I'd play games.
In all honesty, it's a much better deal than Micro Center right now, and that's saying something. Honestly,
that's crazy.
Way better. I mean, $50+ better.
Yeah. Jeremy, your pick.
No, this is a warning. This is definitely a warning. If you like the original XCOM style games, and you have a job or a life or any other sort of hobbies, do not look at Terra Invicta. Oh my God. So this was originally sort of put out, and I kickstarted it because it looked amazing, although it looked like a very different game from before. Instead of being XCOM turn-based fighting on the ground, it's ship-to-ship combat. At least if you ever figure out how to build ships and, arm them and deal with Delta V and Holtzman's transfers, because you don't just fly from the moon to Earth. You plot the transfer. You decide how much Delta V you're feeling like burning to get there, whether you do it a little slowly or not. And essentially what you start with is a world map, just like you're used to with the XCOM games, except every country is labeled. And you need to keep track of every single one of these countries, because if there's a revolution going on in Angola, well, you damn well better know where Angola is, or you're going to have to go do the search. So it's also a great geography lesson. Once you start trying to build ships, you've got to start building space stations to be able to then build mining things on asteroids, or, I've gotten as far out as the moons of Jupiter at this point. And the worst thing about it is that the aliens are so significantly far beyond you that when you first manage to scrape together a ship and try and attack them, and you're coming in and they're coming this way, you realize you have to hit full brake to try and slow down a little bit while these things are flying all around you in circles and blowing up your ships. It's insane. It's amazingly well written, and I can't stop playing it. I'm actually mad at you guys for making the show go on this long.
Should I be worried that it has this little warning, this game is currently in development, even though you can buy it?
They're patching little things, but there's no major game-breaking patches that have come out at all.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that it's still in development. I think that Good Old Games just might not have updated their page.
Okay.
You can get on Steam if you prefer. But yeah, if you're into that sort of game, and just don't buy it unless you got a lot of holidays to blow.
I won't, because I have so many games that I haven't played and no time. I don't know why I'd even get a new CPU. It just doesn't make any sense.
Brett, do you have a pick this week?
Yeah, I actually picked something fairly simple. Usually I would pick some sort of widescreen display, but this week I went with sort of a television widescreen display accessory, and this is a way to cleverly mount your sound bars for only about $20. What this bracketing system does is actually mounts to the same bracket system that is holding your display on the wall. There's a perfect graphic to show it off, and it sandwiches in there or attaches to the back, and is a great way to mount your soundbar so that you can tilt your display or aim it in the direction, and your soundbar moves in the very same way. And this obviously can work up above or down below. So rather than having your soundbar sitting on a piece of furniture, because why are you such a heathen? You have a piece of furniture below your floating TV? Get rid of that. It's just holding up your soundbar. Use this, attach it to your TV mount, and aim the sound in the same direction as the display for $20.
Does it include appropriate screws? Because I imagine if you're sandwiching another piece of metal, certain TVs
I think it does.
might need just a little bit more thread.
Those are all quarter 20s, I believe, so I think it includes it.
It is kind of tricky sometimes to find the right length, though.
True.
I've done it. I've gone to the hardware store and looked for a replacement screw because the one I had just wasn't quite enough to give me a secure feeling when you put like a 60-pound TV on the wall.
I had that moment when I hung my LG 65 on the wall. Yeah,
that's the one I have. You'd think, oh, they're so razor thin because the top of the TV is like a millimeter thick,
wafer thin.
But the bottom of the TV is not. And the overall weight
of
the thing is like 65 pounds because it's like a big sheet of glass. It's not light,
but it's beautiful.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, today's background is Warhammer 40K.
Yes.
Warhammer 40. Those are Ultramarines, by the way.
Nice. Josh, do you have an outro in your system?
Oh, Lord. Leave.